Welcome to the WP-Tonic show. And this is episode 330. And as you might guess, I'm not Jonathan Denwood. I'm filling in for Jonathan Denwood as host. This is John Locke. But Jonathan's here, and we've got a small, powerful panel. We're going to discuss the latest news in WordPress and the web. So let's introduce everybody else. And we'll start with Sally.
All right. My name is Sally Getch. I am a WordPress consultant as WP Fangirl. I'm the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California. And I am glad to be back after a few days away.
Yeah.
Nice. And then Chris.
I'm Chris Badgett from Lifter LMS, which is a tool for creating, selling, and protecting engaging online courses. I also have a podcast for course creators called LMS Cast, and I am an organizer of the Portland, Maine WordCamp, which is happening on November 3rd. And if you come, you can stick your head and get your picture inside my rocket there.
So how much snow is there in Portland, Maine in November?
Probably not much. It's on the coast.
Oh, there you go. Well, and do you introduce me, John?
Nah, you don't get no introduction.
No,
no, go ahead.
You need no introduction. Everyone knows who you are.
Tell us who you are.
Well, I'm the normal host, but I'm on holiday mode, folks. I'm visiting relatives, friends. I'm seeing Lee Jackson next week. I'm going up north to see Lee. Should be hilarious. And I'm going to be live on one of his podcasts, so I'll be able to cause mayhem there, won't I, John?
It's only fair.
Sounds awesome.
It does sound I'm going to enjoy destroying his show, but I haven't told him that yet. And I might be leaving soon, folks, because I'm going to see my nephew. He's supposed to be picking me up in 10 minutes. But I thought I'd join our great panel and start the show off. So what's the first story, John?
First story. Well, hold on here. Let me look at the list. Oh, first story. This one was really interesting. And this was from The Tavern. And it was Gutenberg Cloud, a cross-platform community library for custom Gutenberg blocks. And basically, the Drupal team, the Drupal community, has tagged themselves in with a hot tag, and they've developed a kind of a cloud repository of blocks. And I know Chris has a few thoughts on this I'd like to hear.
So I find this really interesting in terms of how open source GPL projects work together. And in tech, there's often all these, layers to what actually creates the website. And this whole concept of blocks, seeing different companies that are in many ways competitors working together is really interesting to me. And instead of kind of having it, the Drupal way or the WordPress way, seeing some collaboration, I think, is really powerful, because it's easy to get in a dualistic thinking, like you have to either be a Drupal person or you have to be a WordPress person or you have to be a Wix person or whatever. But sometimes in conflict, I do believe in healthy competition and the power of the open market. But sometimes there's a phrase called transcending and including. So instead of just constantly being in battle, if there's a way you can transcend the current situation to either solve a problem or take advantage of an opportunity and be inclusive with your solution, it's just a different way of, seeing the world. And it's kind of it's a less like black and white binary way of thinking, which a lot of innovation can come out of. So I'm really excited to see where it goes, to see if blocks can in fact be shared across different publishing platforms.
I wanted to ask Sally this. One of the comments that somebody made in here is this could become the head for headless CMSs, because the goal of this block repository is to be platform agnostic. I think these are mostly JavaScript based blocks, but how could this project help both the WordPress and Drupal communities?
Well, I find it really interesting that the Drupal community just jumped all over Gutenberg, or at least that's my perspective from outside it, based on, some conference talks about it and the fact that this, somebody said, yes, let's do Gutenberg for, and made their project. And, and the WordPress devs have been much more anxious about it. And I think some of it is that one of the Drupal lectures talked about how the data structure for Drupal is already really well suited to blocks, and therefore this is something that in some ways is easier for them to implement. But I do think this is this is a cool idea, and also that so many people are already producing different custom blocks for Gutenberg, and a lot of them are repeating the same ones. So it's got like, okay, do we really need like 15 different, pricing table blocks? And possibly having a central repository will make people think, oh, okay, I don't need to create that. Somebody else did one. It's pretty good. It's customizable enough that I can use it in the ways I want it. But I see that even with, however many dozens of blocks there are here, they don't have one for this. And, my company or my client needs one like this. And, I'm going to make it, and then I'll put it in here in case it's useful to someone else. So I really like this idea. I like the cross-platform notice, because I do think that's sort of like, yes, this is what open source is supposed to be like. I also think it could get really interesting in the competition department if Drupal ends up with an easier user interface as a result of this. I mean, right now their market share is small, although what they tend to have is large enterprise clients. But that WordPress needs a little competition, and to see people working on similar stuff. So I I am really interested to see where this is going to go, and I think the enthusiasm of the Drupal community maybe can teach some of the WordPress community a lesson about this.
Definitely. Jonathan, any thoughts on this?
I just think it's a win-win, like Chris was saying. I think hopefully you can see where it would get some clear benefits for the Drupal community, because what's the point of having to build in JavaScript your own library if you can share and help develop existing library, which would benefit both WordPress and Drupal? I just see it's a great win-win situation, really.
Yes, the idea of a universal head for the headless CMS. I'm not a headless CMS expert, but I think it could be very helpful to the end user if they had a user interface that was consistent across systems, and you didn't have to learn something new every time. Now, I doubt it can really be universal, but it could be, in both WordPress and Drupal and any other open source platform that wants to take it up. Oops, Jonathan has vanished. I suspect his nephew has arrived to
yeah, could be
out for homemade British cooking.
Oh, very good. Well, we're going to move on to this next story, and we're going to switch the pace up to the world of marketing. And this is a video from Professor Scott Galloway and the folks at L2 called The Gangsta Marketing Move of 2018. And damn, it feels good to be a gangster. But this is all about Nike choosing Colin Kaepernick as the spokesperson for their, Just Do It campaign. Concurrently, they've also got some campaigns with Serena Williams and some other people that are less known, but this seemed to kick up some controversy. I know, Sally, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a win for Nike, or was this a bad move on their part?
I think it's almost certainly a win for Nike. I mean, one thing that, should be pointed out is that Colin Kaepernick was already one of the spokesmodels for Nike. So they didn't just bring him on board for this. But also, they're looking at who they're mainly marketing to. And Kaepernick has lots of, sympathy from the sort of younger and more liberal crowd. And so I think that even though, yes, there's been some controversy and some people burning their Nikes and so on, that, this would not have happened if Nike didn't think that it was going to be, good for their sales and their brand overall. It's more common for companies to take some kind of a stand on something, or appear to do so. I mean, you don't want to do it so disingenuously that it's really obvious. But and I don't know what where their beliefs fall in things, but while it's we all know provoking controversy gets you attention online. So that you shouldn't be afraid to, if this is a thing that you think is the right thing to do, whether that's you're thinking it's the right thing to do morally or the right thing to do from a business perspective, you have to be willing to risk pissing some people off if you want to actually represent anything to the point where people can love you.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And like I said, Jonathan chose the story and I was a little surprised, but maybe not. But I think this is a good move on Nike's part. I know why they would do this. It's from a purely capitalistic standpoint. They're looking at a global market. They're a global brand. They're trying to, look at the future. And this kind of reminds me, and Kaepernick is protesting police brutality against, Black and other minority segments of the population. But it reminds me of kind of the silent protests of Jesse Owens at the Olympics, or Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, protesting the Vietnam War and doing jail time. I want to know Chris's thoughts on this.
I find it really interesting, and just a background on my personality or my style is I have what I call the JOMO, which is called the joy of missing out. And what that means is I don't have a TV, I don't watch the news. So I'm very, I don't know, when I first saw this come up, I didn't even know who this guy was. There's like TV shows that everybody knows about, I've never heard of. Like I just recently found out who Kim Kardashian was. That's how bad it is. But
you were, the joy of missing out is definitely correct in that case.
And then this is so when I see something like this come up, I get interested because it seems like, oh, something's going on in society that maybe I'll check this out. So I kind of looked into it, and from a marketing perspective, there's a lot of things going on here. One of them is when you have, every brand needs celebrity endorsements, or it's nice to have if you can get it, especially if you're a mega brand. There's also a trend in marketing and just online presence right now where people have their BS meters are off the chart. So they want authenticity. They don't want overproduction. They don't want too polished. They don't want too perfect. So I think picking somebody who is not just squeaky clean, whether it's this guy or Tiger Woods or Bill Clinton or whoever it is, that's just kind of like the imperfection is now the new black. And some marketers even call that, in something called the character diamond, it's like a kryptonite where I'm not necessarily saying it's a weakness, but just your imperfection or your whatever it is for you as a personal brand is now just as important as the things you're good at. So that's just an interesting thought. Another thing is, I'm just, as somebody who doesn't really follow news, haven't had a TV in like 20 years and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm aware of what's going on in the political debate somewhat, but I just can't help it when I walk into an airport or something like that. But I have never seen in our society such how politics have become so much like shock entertainment value. So the fact that Nike is doing, shock marketing or controversial marketing, it's no surprise. And with privacy these days and what's possible with, knowing about people and how stories spread and stuff like that, it's almost impossible for anybody to be completely perfect and maintain like a ironclad persona online if you've done anything. And I would love to hear Sally's points on this. Political correctness is, I mean, there's two sides to that debate. Like, should people take a knee? Should they not? I'm a believer in like freedom of expression and free speech and freedom of opinion and everything. So, but it's polarizing. And there's also some marketing advice out there that if you're going to do content marketing or something like that, at least once a year, you should do something that's like really shocking and controversial. So maybe this is Nike's this year. So those are some thoughts.
Right. I mean, as I said in our Slack channel before, yeah, whether you know, this is politically correct either for Nike or for Kaepernick is kind of depends on what your politics are. You know, there are a lot of people for whom, you know, it's absolutely the correct thing to do to engage in peaceful protest and that sort of thing. And, you know, I mean, there is a lot of police brutality against, you know, particularly Black people in America. And that's, you know, something to call attention to. You know, and there are other people who think, you know, this is disrespecting the flag or the national anthem or the, you know, military personnel who are and any of that. And I don't think any of that was ever in the intention. But you know, for those people, clearly what Kaepernick is doing is not politically correct and maybe very upsetting. So, you know, this is where the controversy seems to come from. But yeah, it's, you know, this is not a something with a really absolute answer. It depends on, you know, where in the spectrum you fall, and it's not even are you or are you not a patriot, because you may well feel that, you know, this freedom of expression that people have used to protest over the years is part of what makes America a great place to live, that, you know, we don't suppress this kind of dissent when it's not actually, you know, threatening to people. So yeah, there's lots of room for debate, and this is a very polarized time in our history. I don't think that, you know, it required amazing bravery on the part of Nike or anything like that. I think that if they really thought that it was going to, you know, completely tank their stock and their sales, they would not have done it.
No, and I think you're right. And like I said, this could be a decades long discussion on, you know, just a lot of different things, like, you know, how different people see the world and interpret things. Obviously, Nike thought that, you know, the way that they see this whole situation is they obviously think that they're going to gain more market share or more, you know, positive publicity from this than negative. And I agree with Chris that sometimes you have to do things that are polarizing and put your stake in the ground. And that's part of branding. That's part of stating what your position is. And, you know, sometimes people won't agree with it, but that's okay. So we're going to move on to the third story, which is I dismantled Google's tracking systems, and here's what happened. That comes from the Next Web. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Chris.
So basically, in this article, somebody, you know, disabled as much Google tracking stuff, and a couple things. The two main points I think are that there was still tracking going on after he turned everything off, and then the other point was the device and the experience became a lot less useful in terms of, you know, helping him find things and how fast the device operated, the iPhone or the Android or whatever it was. So it's just an interesting debate. I don't think the answer is ever to just go back. I'd be the first person that people would think that I want people to go back and live off the land and just cut ties with technology. But this, again, is one of those kind of transcend and include moments that I think we just need to figure out how to navigate this. And Morton's not here. He's a champion of ethics, but this is an area where we really need to look at ethical implications, and also do a little future scenario planning as this technology advances, and think about some situations that are going to pop up before they do. So one of the interesting things related to this, there's a great author. His name is Yuval Harari. He wrote the book Sapiens, and then he wrote a book called Homo Deus, and then he wrote a new book called 21 Lessons. I forget the rest of the title. He's a deep thinker. Sapiens is an amazing book, but he's a hardcore thinker about these kinds of things, and especially this future with technology. His thing is, it's all about clarity, and there's going to be a moment, an inflection point, where the algorithms, the AI, the machine has more predictive capability than the human beings. And if you look at the intersection of infotech and biotech as an example of what I'm talking about here, based on big data, and diagnostic tests and pattern recognition, machines are going to become better at like predicting disease than individual doctors, because of the big data points, and also catching things like cancer at earlier stages based on all that data and the early indicators, and the post look back over the progression with all this data. So I think that's kind of cool, but it's also introduces we need to think about this and be ready for that moment where Google knows where we want to go or what we want to buy before we do, based on even indicators of, that from our childhood, or our relationships within Facebook of, what our political party might be and all that. And it's not perfect, and it doesn't always work correctly, but it's getting better and better over time. And having Amazon suggest products based on your buying history and other people like you, this is just the beginning. And I think we need to embrace it, but put some smart people in a room together and really start looking at the future, and especially ethics, and keeping it under control.
Well said. I do agree with what you're saying, that all these platforms, whether it's Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Android, Twitter, whatever it is basically all there to mine data so they can sell it back to marketers. And I do agree that ethics is important, but I'm not sure that it jibes with the function of what these platforms is basically to make money. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Sally. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think part of the issue, ethically speaking, is not so much that they are collecting information about you, but that they had been collecting information about you without telling you they were doing it or telling you what they were doing with it. I've noticed I'm running an ad blocker on one of my browsers, and I just started doing this. And I noticed I go to a lot of these newspaper websites, and they're like, basically, please turn off your ad blocker because it's basically either pay us money or turn off your ad blocker. And I can understand why they do that, except the reason that I put the ad blocker on there is that so many of these sites are unreadable. If you don't block the ads, you cannot actually see the content. So there has to be a balance somewhere between, the need to make money, which is a legitimate requirement, and the need to give people, some autonomy and some degree of privacy. And yeah, I mean, in some ways, you wish that the tracking was better, because okay, so I spent months researching before I bought my car. I still see ads for that car. I bought it 2 years ago. So it's sort of like, yeah, well, could you be tracking enough to notice when I didn't buy it online, but I don't think that would make much difference, because I've heard people talk about this kind of experience before. But it's the idea of, oh, well, yeah, we took all your personal information and we sold it to somebody else without telling you that might happen. And people will choose to trade quite a bit of information for access to stuff if they value it, but they need to have the choice. So it's kind of like, well, in one way, we want the tracking to be better, because as it does say in the article, sometimes they guess wrong about your demographic, or even your age, your gender, your race, the big issue that we've seen with how facial recognition works fairly well if you're a white man, but not so well for anybody else. And so you want people supervising to make sure that all the decisions aren't just automated. But I think that probably in a lot of cases, the machines can already do a better job of predicting and analyzing and so forth.
Yeah, I get what you're saying about retargeting. I almost wonder if that would be more creepy, if it would know if you bought a certain product and then stop showing you the ad altogether. I think that in some ways that might be more sinister. We're going to move on to the fourth.
I want a button I can click to say, I already own it. You can do that with like some of Amazon's recommendations to make them go away. I want a button I can click on that ad that says, I already own it, go away.
That might be good. Yeah. Our fourth story is coming to us from the Studio Press blog, and this is entitled "The Future of Gutenberg and Genesis."
And I so wish we had Dr. Evil with us today, because he's the one who's always carrying on about the obsolescence of Genesis. And we know that WP Engine bought Studio Press recently, and they are investing resources into it that Studio Press wasn't able to before. So they're working hard on updating the way the Genesis framework operates to work well with Gutenberg blocks. And I think this is terrific, because back in the day, when did I start using Genesis? 2011 maybe. The way that they built their homepages out of widgets was a very kind of clever workaround for the situation that it was tough to customize something like that, because we just had this blob of an editor. But that really kind of already jumped the shark with the launch of page builders. And now the thought that, okay, well, we can build these, we can revise these child themes so that instead of these widgets, they're using Gutenberg block templates. And it's so much easier for a client who wants to change something on the home page to go to the page that says home and find all this stuff laid out in there that they can either fill in or replace, than it is to say, oh yeah, well, for the home page, you got to go over to the widgets, and then you need to, that's just really kludgy. And so it's I think inevitable that anybody who wants to survive has to keep up with this, and it's good to see the confirmation that it's happening.
Yeah, definitely, it's happening. I wanted to ask you, Chris, too. One of the things that they mentioned in this article, one of the things that they're worried about is they don't want it to be like a box of Crayolas where they're, you hand it over to a client and they're just picking colors that are not part of the brand. They want to update all the Genesis themes to where they're compatible with Gutenberg blocks, but have some degree of control. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a smart play for them to go big into the blocks and theme compatibility and kind of take a lead there. And I know just from WP Engine and knowing Jason a little bit and some of his material, WP Engine is way bigger than just him now, but they're very good at like looking at the future and being strategic. So I have a lot of hope and optimism for whatever it is they are going to do. So I just want to say that. I was also on my podcast, LMS Cast. The episode isn't out yet, but yesterday I interviewed somebody named Jason Show, who is one of the founders of a video editing tool called Animoto, which allows you to put together little kind of marketing kind of videos for social media. without being a visual or without being a video editor. It includes all the stock video, stock photography. You can put your own stuff in there too. It's cool. It's 10 years old, the project. He's got over 1 million people on the platform. And one of the interesting things he said is he's trying to help people at level 0 make decent videos. And we got into this big conversation about protecting users from themselves. And we know how in the WordPress ecosystem, when you do client services as an agency or as a freelancer and you hand over a project, we all know that a client who doesn't have a design eye or a user experience kind of track record or anything like that, if those skills aren't developed, they can quickly destroy the design and the user experience or the strategy of the website even. And so there's just a lot that goes into, making a great website and website experience. So the fact that they're having a conversation around what do themes do in the future? Can we make blocks? Can the theme do some of the heavy lifting of design? Give people some options, marketers, it says in that article, to make the buttons orange and yellow or whatever, but not totally brick the design of the site, or have some consistency. If we start changing a button color on one page, maybe it's going to be a global thing. I don't know. But in the past, the themes did a lot of that, and some of them do what blocks kind of do, little custom functionality pieces, and then you switch themes and the site breaks. But the utopia of being able to change themes that have some predefined design settings for blocks that give just the right amount of flexibility and control to site owners, non-technical people, quote, marketers, and have them be able to modify things but not break best practices in design and user experience and whatever typography. I think that's a really interesting idea. I hope they're heading in that direction.
Yeah, I think it would be good if they did that as well. Make it customizable, but maybe have some sort of parameters that the developer sets in coordination with them, to where it just doesn't become finger painting or whatever.
Right. Well, you can already, as a theme developer, you can already say, hey, I want to lock down the color palette to these available colors. So you may choose to do that, or you may choose to say, I want these to be the default colors. And, if they're really determined to break their site, they can pick other colors. But we already have seen that the color picker in Gutenberg warns you if you don't have a good enough color contrast ratio. So it will help to at least help you avoid big pitfalls for accessibility. But there's also what I was doing for WordCamp Sacramento was creating a portfolio plugin that used block templates for your portfolio post types. And you can set attributes on those so that it loads in with not just, you have an image block here and you have a text block here and you have a heading block here. But if you want big text for emphasis, you can say, I want to, this should have the font size of this one should be a large font and it should be bold, or it should be a contrasting color, or it should be, whatever, to create some consistency, because it's kind of a fine line between trying to keep trying to keep the clients on brand because, either they have corporate standards for how they produce stuff, or you just don't want them to turn it into GeoCities, and giving them freedom to do things that you might not previously have thought about them wanting to do, because maybe they didn't mention that specific thing. But then if you build something, the way I always used to build this kind of stuff, with ACF, well, if you put in a section where they can include a link to a different page in your site, but then they suddenly want to link to a page that's on another site, and that's the wrong kind of a field, then they have to come back to you, or you have to change the field type, or they have to change the field type. And so, yeah, there's a tricky balance between trapping people and, giving them guardrails so they don't fall off the cliff.
No, and yeah, go ahead.
I believe that this will help a lot with that.
No, absolutely. And I feel you on that. I have developed a ton of sites using ACF to kind of put those guardrails into where people just aren't, doing WTF ever. But yeah, it would be cool to see where Genesis and WP Engine take this as we move into a Gutenberg world. Last story on our agenda today is also from the tavern. Syed Belki and WP Forums have acquired pirate forums from Theme Isle. So obviously the play here is to retire this plugin because I guess Theme Isle, like this forum is just not one of the popular forums like WP forums or Gravity forums or Caldera or Ninja forums. And the play is to get people to switch to WP forums. Maybe they're going to put some sort of nag in there. A lot of stuff getting acquired this year. What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
I think it's a good move, great move by WP Forums, especially if it was kind of going out of style or limited flexibility, but it had a bunch of users. There's an opportunity there because I like how it had like a single function. It was like simple contact form. And that's what Pirate Forums did. And it was really easy, it looks, there's a lot of active loyal users. You can do that in the free WP Forums plugin. It makes sense. There's a book, like a business book that was popular, I think in the 90s called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Yep.
And he talks about these four types of ways of working. One's as the worker, one's as the manager, one is the business owner, and one is the investor. And we're starting to see that WordPress. So what I'm saying here, what we're seeing from Syed and the team at Automotive and WP Forums is they're definitely taking on the owner mindset, as we saw with their accelerator program. They're getting into the investor style. And in theory, you can grow faster that way, whether you're acquiring users or acquiring people, staff, talented people, also called an acqui-hire. It can be a much faster way to grow than, so it can accelerate growth. And when it's a win-win for both companies and the user base, and there's finances in place and cash flow to do it, so it's a no-brainer. So I'm glad to see it. It's just another signal that our ecosystem is maturing, and there's still healthy competition in the forum space. This isn't a monopoly. It's good.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask you just a follow up to that before I move on to Sally. Do you think, like I was saying, there is a lot of maturation going on in the WordPress ecosystem. What do you think about? There's still room for lots of players to come up in different categories. Yes or no?
Yes, I think that the Wild West easy days are not. Those days have kind of come and gone in most known like areas, or if you're going to build a plugin or an industry specific theme or whatever. The early days, when I started doing video marketing on YouTube, I remember doing this campaign for selling some real estate. I was paying like 5 cents a click, or something really cheap. That's like the Wild West days. The Wild West days are kind of done, but I see plenty of room for opportunity across, even if you want to go into a crowded space or if you want to go into a blue ocean space, as long as the innovation is there. And there's a saying, whoever is closer to the customers win. If you go to a forum customer, if you go to a page builder customer, if you go to an LMS customer, and you really listen deeply of what they're trying to achieve and what they're struggling with, there's room for innovation everywhere. So I can be a little optimistic. And like I said, I have a JOMO issue. So maybe there's some other news that I'm not aware of. But for me personally, I see a lot of opportunity out there. And, as long as WordPress can navigate this Gutenberg thing successfully, I think it's going to be a great thing. And we're going to continue to grow, and we may look back at this moment in time and call it the early days.
Yeah, most definitely. What are your thoughts on this, Sally? And what are your thoughts on what might be some other properties out there that might be ripe for acquisition?
Acquiring a competitor in order to take them off the table is an old, time-honored tradition. One of the interesting things about this is, as one of the comments says, that if it looked like pirate forms was sort of going to die anyway, then what are they acquiring? They could probably have put out their planned migration tool regardless, because people do that often for here. If you switch to our product, we'll make it easy for you to move your stuff from competitor product. And so what precisely are they getting out of it is kind of an interesting question in this sense. But I think, anything that you've built up and it's fairly successful and there's some good stuff in it, but for whatever reason, you're not in a position to take it to the next level, but there's definitely a growing market for it. That's something where there might be an acquisition happening, or where somebody else can see how they would monetize it in a way that you didn't think about. So I'm not sitting around looking for stuff to invest in. That's not my arena. But I think there are going to be more of these acquisitions and more consolidation. And at the same time, there is still, it's like, wow, we have however many tens of thousands of plugins, and yet there's really not a very good solution for X. And you might not encounter that until you are, working for a client where suddenly they need X. And then you realize, oh yeah, there's still a lot of gaps here, that while people have created solutions for a lot of very common things, there are some less common things that people haven't been focusing on, and where there's really room for something.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with what you're saying. And I'm reading the comments here too, and I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with pirate forms. I use another one of ThemeIsle's products on my site right now, but I was not really aware of this one. And so I think that when it comes to really simple contact forms, maybe this one was, number 3 or number 4. And, like the CEO from GE from the 1980s said, you want to be 1 or 2. You don't want to, nothing really exists below either like 1 or 2 in a category in the minds of the people. So, this is just some sort of euthanasia where WP Forms can acquire some more customers. So, good for them. I think there's definitely room for more players in a lot of spaces. It's a big market. WordPress is pretty huge. So that's all the stories that we have for this week. And yeah, so that's it. So right up on the time. So Chris, how do we get a hold of you?
You can find me at lifterlms.com or on my podcast LMScast, or we can hook up in person at WordCamp Portland, Maine on November 3rd. Also, my business partner Thomas is going to be at WordCamp Los Angeles this weekend.
Nice. I love that sweet photo booth with the lifter rocket and the lifter helmet. Looking forward to seeing those on social media. Sally, how do we get a hold of you?
You can find me at WPFangirl.com. You can find my meetup at eastbaywp.com. I'm repeating my talk about block templates in Gutenberg with some expanded bits. And this week, so Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific, if you're in the area. And I am at Sally Getch on Twitter and most other places.
And you can find me at my website, which is lockdownseo.com. You can also find me on YouTube. Just search hashtag lockdown SEO. And I'm putting out SEO tips for manufacturing firms once a week there. For the regular host, my friend Jonathan Denwood, you can definitely check all the episodes out, all 330 episodes of WP-Tonic up to this point. It's at wp-tonic.com. Facebook page is WP-Tonic, WP-Tonic everywhere. So for the WP-Tonic posse in effect, saying peace out, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.